This is Calvin Castine. It's a Saturday morning, August 26th, the year 2000. I'm at St. Edmund's Church Hall in Ellenberg Corners, and the last time I was here, I was at a quilting show, and lo and behold, we're at another quilting show here on this 26th day of August. It's officially going to open in about 37 minutes, so we're going to take a quick tour of what's happening, and we're going to ask these two young ladies, one younger than the other, but the two young ladies here, Pam Demore on your left and Leanne Supernaw on our right, to tell us what's happening here today.
Hi Calvin, welcome to our quilt show. This is our first ever quilt show, so we're very excited. Most guilds take 1 to 2 years to put their quilt show together. We did it in 3 months, and we did it to benefit one of our members whose daughter has just gone through bone marrow transplant surgery to help the family out. So this is, the quilt we're standing in front of is done by our Spotlight quilter. Her name is Marie Demore. She is our oldest member and one of our original members, and we just thought it would be a fabulous quilt to have in the entry as you walk in, to show everyone sort of what the Log Cabin Quilters is all about.
Well, over here next to me, Pam, here, so I can ask you some questions.
Do you, okay.
Share that microphone a little bit.
Okay, now this quilt is actually a fabulous quilt. This quilt has been all over the country. It's won awards, and it took a first place a few years ago in the Vermont Quilt Festival. It's done by one of our members who's an expert quilter, and it just is an exquisite piece. It's probably one of the more valuable pieces here at the show. It's called The 12 Days of Christmas.
It's called My True Love's Gifts.
Oh, well, it's about the 12 Days of Christmas. My true love gave to me, you know, the song. And this is a quilt that was done by one of our members. It was done, I think, about 20 years ago, and this is the first quilt she ever made, so she put it in as a first quilt. And this is really interesting to see some of the quilts that she's making now compared to this one and see her growth in quilting. And she's not here to tell the story because she won't be until later today, but my guess is this is all fabric left over that she had from other sewing projects, and members of her family donated and whatnot because of all the different fabrics involved.
It's got all these little rectangular or square pieces here. Is it more work when you start dealing with those little pieces and when you get bigger pieces, or is this typical to have that many different sewing angles to handle?
Well, typically you'll see a lot of them with little pieces like this, but there are lots of new quick cut and sew methods that are easier to do called strip quilting. This one, she obviously cut all the little squares and sewed them in strips and then sewed the strips together, which is very tedious and very time consuming. And that's probably why when she started this 20 years ago, it maybe took her a while to start another quilt because she probably was sick to death of working on it.
Well, maybe she started it 20 years ago and finished it 15 years ago.
Could be. This is an interesting piece. It's what we call a whole cloth quilt. Although it looks very detailed. Leanne, can you just flip over so they can see the back? See the beautiful quilting? But the front, the floral part is all one piece of fabric, and isn't it a beautiful quilt? It really gives a wonderful impact. Now, if you can close up to the background, the back of these quilts sometimes are just as beautiful as the front, and that's why we wear white gloves, so that when someone wants to see the back, we can flip it over and show it to them, and then they can see the detail. We don't want people to touch the quilts because the oil from their hands could damage the quilt down the road.
So every one of those little swirls that's all sewing, right?
That's all stitching, yes.
Yes. Do you think Vanna White's worried right now? That's pretty good. Pretty good job there, Leanne.
This is an applique sampler, and this is a project that sometimes ladies will do an applique block of the month, or over years they'll do applique blocks. Sometimes groups will get together and, like, for a wedding gift, and like 12 or 16 ladies in the family or friends will make blocks and give as a gift, and that's put together into a quilt. So a lot of times these applique quilts tell a story. I don't know the story behind this one, but I'm sure if the maker were here, she could tell you. Now these blocks, if you look, it looks like they're all signed. So this tells me it's probably a friendship quilt that everybody made a block and then they all got put together in one quilt.
Now the signature's all sewn. Is that how you do it?
No, we do our signature. Well, you can sew the signatures on here. They look like they're permanently written in with a special pen that quilters use. That is that's permanent. It's a special. It's called a Pigma pen, like a Sharpie, but very fine point Sharpie.
Yeah, they did an extra one, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Give me a little history of the log cabin quilters, if you could.
Well, the Log Cabin Quilters formed 4 years ago, so we're starting our 5th season. We meet in Altona at the Mom Pa Craft Shop, which is a little log cabin. That's why we called ourselves the Log Cabin Quilters. And we meet the second Sunday of the month. And we formed just because a bunch of us were doing quilting together. It was myself, Leanne, her mother, her sister, and my mother. The 5 of us were always getting together for quilting, and we decided rather than join a bigger guild that was more impersonal, we would just start our own guild and start our own little group. And now we have about 25 ladies, and it's starting our 5th season, and it's just doing really wonderful. And this show just makes us so proud, because for a group of this size to put on a beautiful show like this is quite an undertaking, especially putting it together in just a few months. We've had a lot of help, though, from the community, a lot of community involvement, a lot of donations of merchandise and help, services, things donated to our silent auction. Now, this quilt I'm especially proud of because this was made by my daughter, who's 12 years old. And this is her first bed quilt. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier with strip quilting. What we did is we sewed strips of each color together, and then we cut the strips crosswise, and then we staggered them, and that's what creates this Bargello effect. And even though she's young and her blocks don't perfectly match, because of the blending of the colors, you need to get up really close. And Leanne, flip that over so we can see the back. Look at the back is as pretty as the front. We had it professionally quilted. My daughter did the top, and then we sent it to Irene Bowe, who's a professional quilter in the area. She machine quilted it and put the binding on for us. And she did it in about 3 days.
Irene Bowe, one of the Silver Sisters.
Yes, one of the Silver Sisters, who's a very accomplished quilter. In fact, I believe this is one of Irene's quilts. This is what we call a whole cloth quilt, and this is a technique called trapunto. And trapunto is when you go inside either from the back or from the side, and you put extra stuffing in, and that's why this is raised, and it shows more detail. So you can take this is just one big piece of fabric, but look how detailed and patterned it is for one piece of fabric.
How many quilts do you have here?
We have over 200 entries, including the wall hangings, the bed-size quilts, the Quilted Wearables, and our antique quilt display.
Now these wall hangings are considered quilting?
Yep. Any of these are considered quilts. People think of quilts as just being a blanket on your bed, but quilts are anything where you've got 3 layers, a front, a back, and a batting that are like secured together, either by ties, like this one right here is all tied. This is a baby quilt that Leanne made right before her son was born. She was bored to death and wanted to make a project. Yeah, and it's sweet, isn't it?
How can you be bored to death when you're pregnant? I don't know.
Because she was home and she couldn't work. And quilting can also combine other techniques. And in this area, we've got quite a bit of embroidery. We've got embroidery here on this quilt. I don't know if you can see this. That is machine embroidery. And then this one has candle wicking with some hand painting. And then this one has hand embroidery. So you can mix other techniques with quilting, which is part of the fun.
Let's look at this here. Bring that mic a little closer here.
Okay, yep.
These are obviously automobiles. How would you trace those out? Is that you don't get those just like they are to get a pattern, or how does that work?
Well, I'm not sure how this quilter did it, but she probably had a couple different ways. One of them might have been that she might have put the fabric over what we call a light box with a picture of the car, a line drawing of the car, and then traced it out onto the fabric. Or she might have used an overhead projector and projected the picture onto the wall and put her fabric on the wall and drew it out that way. Those are two of the most common ways of quilters transferring a drawing or a picture onto their fabric.
All right, so just so nobody thinks that those cars came that way and she just sewed it on there. That's all hand done.
Correct. That's all hand done. Didn't she do a beautiful job?
Yes.
Yep. You're done. This is a lovely machine pieced and machine quilted project. And as Leanne and I were saying earlier, some of these fabrics by themselves, we would look at them on the bolt and think, oh, that's not real attractive. But when you see it in a quilt combined with other related fabrics, it really is striking.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to make something completely out of that particular pattern, but you put it here.
Amazing how great it looks in the quilt.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think of it. And that's sort of the fun of seeing the creativity, what one woman's vision, what I would envision wouldn't be what someone else would envision. So that's sort of the fun. This is
said women. Is it only
Oh,
women?
actually no, we have a couple quilts here that were made by a man, and actually he's walking around. Would you like to interview him?
Well, sure. You can interview him.
Well, we have Gerald Seguin over here. Gerald, would you like to say hello to Hometown Cable? And Gerald is one of our quilter. He's not one of our members. He's a member of the Champlain Valley Quilt Guild in Plattsburgh, and you have 3 entries in here, right? 3?
We have 4.
4 entries. He and his wife are both quilters, and you didn't start quilting until you were retired. Is that correct?
That's right, about 6 years ago.
And he's already had quilts that have won awards in big quilt festivals like Vermont Quilt Festival and Plattsburgh Quilt Show, and where else?
We try.
Yeah, he's a very good quilter. You wouldn't, and look at these hands. Let me show you your hands. I mean, these are farmer hands. Look at these hands, and he has the most beautiful stitch you'd ever see. He's a really wonderful quilter.
Uh-oh.
So they're not all women. Not all women.
He's trying to give me a boost, huh?
Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
This is a kind of interesting part of our antique display. This was found by one of our ladies. Actually, I think she got this box. It was in a bottom of a box of stuff she bought at an auction. And there are all these quilt blocks that were made, and it has the Methodist Church in Hemmingford, and it has all these signature blocks. And in the box was a little journal with all the names of the ladies who worked on the blocks and their 5-cent donations they made to pay for their blocks. So we'd like to know a little more. So if anyone knows anything about the history of the Methodist Church in Hemmingford, we'd like to know who some of these people are.
Okay, yeah, that's maybe we can go up to Hemmingford and ask. They're very much into this type of thing. Did you happen to go up there for their Old Home Day week this year?
No, I didn't, but
They had a whole bunch of different artists who have done paintings of the area, and it included Perry's Mills and Moore's Forks area, along with Hemmingford. So there's a lot of history tied between the Moore's area, Moore's Forks, and Hemmingford.
Yeah. And now we have an antique display here, and this area of the display I'm especially proud of because this is my great-great-grandmother. This is actually, we have a photograph of her, and we have a little bit of her life story, and we have several of the quilts that she made. I believe there's 6 on display that my grandmother made, all in this section right here. And you can see some of them have the handprints. Now this handprint with the F was my Uncle Frank. And these right here, see the footprint and the handprint? That one was an older one because look how much bigger Frank was. He got little there. This is an older quilt. This one had Frank and Uncle John, which were her first 2 children. So we think this is probably one of her first quilts. We think that quilt was probably made around 1905. Because it doesn't have her other 3 sons. She had 5 sons altogether, one of them being my grandfather. And
What are their names?
her name was Flora Clark Rabideau. It was Frank Rabideau, John Rabideau, Otis Rabideau, who was my grandfather, George Rabideau, and Louis Rabideau.
I feel so silly. All I did with my kids was mark their height on the wall every year.
Well, she marked it with quilts, and you see she's got a lot of embroidery in her quilt saying dates and stuff, and like date of births and different things. And so we thought that was sort of cool that she did that. And we sort of think that maybe because she was a quilter, that's why a lot of her granddaughters, she didn't have any daughters, but maybe that's why a lot of her granddaughters who watched her quilt, my mother being one of them, and some of my cousins that are here, they all now are quilters, and now their daughters, myself, and and so on. We have like 5 generations of quilters now that have spawned from her. But these are all antique quilts that were on loan from different people.
Except for that bingo one up there.
Except for the bingo sign. That's an antique bingo sign.
Okay, now we're going to skip some rows here. Is that all right with you? Or?
Well, we can't see them all because we have over 200 quilts, but you tell me where you want to go.
No?
Well, why don't we walk down on this far aisle? We can look at some of the clothing.
Now, let's look at further.
We have these the memory quilts. This is a new thing. You remember my ice storm quilt that I did with photographs. So these are more memory quilts. And these quilts were actually made for different people, for different events. Like this one was made for a granddaughter when she graduated from high school. I think this one was also. And this one says Remembering Auntie Bert. So it must be Auntie Bert died in 1994, and it's pictures of her. This one's of the family album. This is the DeMoore family, my in-laws, and this is I believe their wedding picture, so kind of fun. This is another memory quilt. I think that was a graduation gift. This is a wedding quilt that was made for Kelly and Bruce Baharnwa when they got married. Photographs from their wedding. This one is called 40 Years of Fun, and this was a 40th wedding anniversary gift made by one of our members, Val Durfee, to her parents. And it's got so many photographs, but it has a lot of cute things. Like she's got little hand embroidered roses on her mother's bouquet and little black buttons for her dad's tuxedo, and she's added a lot of interesting little embellishments that no one else would probably pick up on, but little things that tell a lot of stories. And that's one of the things people don't realize is quilts tell a story for a lot of people, and they're our history, they're our legacy. And we were talking earlier about selling quilts, and I mentioned I don't sell my quilts because I can't put a price on my heart, but that's because I put my heart into all my quilts. If I did it as a business, it would be different. This is right here's a quilt project some of the ladies, they call Stack and Whack, and that's all the same fabric, and they just cut it, they stack it and they cut it, and all the pieces match, and this is all the same fabric but using different parts of the fabric. You can see the pinwheels are different colors or different patterns.
All right, now this reminds me here of these little...
The ties, yeah?
The old quilts.
Oh, well, a lot of the older people, like our grandmothers, and great-grandmothers, did a lot of tied quilts. And I think primarily because they did quilts for necessity, they did quilts for bedding, and they used old clothing and different things that they had hanging around, and they probably didn't have time to hand quilt the nicer pieces. So the quilts that you use every day, the utility quilts, mostly were tied, and then the decorative quilts, like the fancy quilts that were put on for special occasions, were the ones that were hand quilted, or the ones that were given for wedding gifts and that sort of thing. So this is probably going to be a quilt that's going to be used as more of a quilt that's made to be used and treasured and loved, as opposed to one that's just going to be put away for history preservation.
Yeah, if you get a quilt, you'd like to use it, I imagine, in most cases, but there are some that are just too precious to use, I imagine, right?
That's right. That's right. But that's something you need to keep in mind if you are a quilt maker. If you're going to use it, make it so that it will last, because if you quilt it thoroughly and you do the binding properly and you use the right materials, it will last a lot longer than if you use inferior materials. And that, the right thread, the right fabric, the right quilt batting, doubling your binding, all those things make a big difference in how long the longevity of the quilt.
Okay.
Over on this side we have our quilted wearables. People think of quilts as, again, being blankets, and these quilts are all garments that people can wear.
And I noticed none of these are for sale. You have about 40 items for sale?
We have 40 items for sale out of 200. None of the wearables are for sale. But we do have several pieces for sale. And since this is going to air after the show, I want everyone to keep in mind that in 2 years we'll be doing another show. So hopefully the same weekend, 2 years from now, in St. Edmunds. Hopefully they'll let us come back. This has been a great location for us, and we've really enjoyed it. So if they keep that in mind, and if anyone has any questions about joining our guild, can I give them a phone number?
Oh, definitely.
They can call 236-5762, or they can call me at home, 297-2699. This is called like a watercolor 9-patch or a color wash. And this quilt was made by a fairly new quilter. She's only been quilting a few years. And she said this is one of the easiest quilts she ever made, but it's her favorite. And I just think it's beautiful. And it did take a first place in piecing, because it is striking. And this is the Hometown Cable Award here. You can see this. And Calvin, this you deemed as your favorite. Can you tell us why you like this quilt so much?
Because you told me you made it, and you you gave me a $20 bill.
I did not.
No, there was several that I really enjoyed, and it was tough to pick one. And I just left this one here and had a first prize on it, and I didn't want to award one that already had a first prize, and whether if this had a first prize on it, somebody else would have got my first prize, but this is certainly an outstanding one, and it would have been tough to choose between this one and 3 or 4 others. There's 3 or 4 others that were close, but I really enjoyed this, and it shows a lot of contrast, and it's kind of what I expect from a quilt, I guess.
Well, thank you, because this is my quilt. I made this, and this is actually what sits on my bed at home but not today. So I appreciate you doing this.
I know I'd seen it somewhere before.
Now that quilt we were just looking at combines piecing with applique. We have some here that are all applique, which are quite lovely too.
Tell us, give us a little quick definition of piecing.
Well, applique is when you have a background and you apply fabric on top of that to create a picture. Where piecing is when you have sections sewn together like this little blocks pieced together. Okay, so this is an applique, although this part is pieced. And this particular quilt, I'm going to turn on this way, this is applique, but this part's pieced. And this is made by Gerald Seawan, the gentleman you interviewed earlier. Want to see the back? Now, look at, he tags his things with, he has interesting tags, and this is called Dawn of a New Millennium. And it says, we await with hope the dawn of the third millennium, a time of spiritual renewal. And it has his name on it. And you'll notice the stitching is exquisite, and that is all hand stitch. He does everything by hand. Isn't that beautiful?
Yes. That is outstanding and creative too. You know, would somebody draw this picture out first? You can't just suddenly start sewing and expect to end up like looking like this.
I'm sure he had a plan. In fact, do you want to ask him? He's right here. Did you have a drawing of this when you started this, Gerald?
I'm going to let Susan answer that. She'll be right around the corner. Susan? Would you? I can do it, but I'm ready if she doesn't.
Susan, on this Dawn of a New Millennium, can you tell us a little bit about the planning of that quilt? Because it's quite beautiful.
Yes, Gerald got the idea of illustrating the Pope's ideas about a new millennium. And he was wondering if I had an idea about a landscape part of the quilt. He got the dove in the sky, and I had remembered a quilt pattern that I had seen 25 years ago. And so I got it out, and we kind of adjusted it a little bit for this quilt. And then I happened to realize that the woman who designed the pattern was living in Waitsfield, Vermont.
No.
Yeah. So we went over to see her, and we found her. And we showed her the quilt that we had made from her pattern 25 years before.
Cool.
Her name is Judy Dodds.
Now, did you hand dye that fabric?
No, we bought the fabric as it is. The one thing we did to adjust it is that we shortened the bands of color.
I see the seams. I didn't know, though, if that was intentional or...
Yeah. No, it's just a fabric that was
one of those blended
that
dye.
way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fabric makes it, of course. Well, the design's fabulous, and the quilting, but the sky colors, I think,
Yeah,
really
I think it
pull
does
it
too.
together. Well, you did an excellent job.
Thank you.
Because Calvin was asking, how do you plan a quilt like that? So you had a pattern and you just modified it?
Yeah, we had the idea, then we had the pattern, and then we began selecting fabrics for it, which was
That
so
took
much
a long
fun.
yeah, that
It
probably took a little time. Mhm.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun to do.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, that is great, and it just the colors do seem to blend. It's like a rainbow in the sky there, and it really an outstanding. And it's one of several first places, and there are different categories, and it's truly an outstanding exhibit here on this August 26th. And I hope our camera hasn't moved too fast so you can partially appreciate this. But like Pam said, in 2 years you'll get another chance for the Log Cabin Quilters. They'll be putting on another show, and every one of these quilts has a name. Everyone has a title. Some are obvious, like Heart Quilt, but some are more obscure titles that might surprise you. Some are very imaginative titles. Okay, we're going to wrap up our coverage. It's about 10 minutes before the doors open to the public. This is the second time in about 5 or 6 week period that I've been here to St. Edmunds for a quilting show. Is quilting becoming more and more popular, Pam?
Oh, yes. Quilting is growing by leaps and bounds. In fact, the whole sewing industry is kind of moving slowly away from garment construction and moving toward quilting and home deck. Those are the two areas where the sewing industry is really growing, because clothing now is so much more affordable to buy. People aren't really making that much clothing anymore. They're embellishing clothing that they buy, and sewing machines have become so more high tech that now quilting is so much easier. We have walking feet, we have dual feed. We have presser feet that come up and down automatically to machine quilt. We have needle stop positions, and we have just sewing machines have gotten so much more sophisticated. Leanne can tell you, until we got good sewing machines, we didn't know how much we enjoyed to sew, did we? Because buying the right sewing machine, and because of that, people are now enjoying to sew a lot more, and quilting is a way of creating a work of art with fabric, and the ladies who like to use fabric and like to sew, this is their way of being creative, and this is their way of creating a legacy that will last for maybe a couple hundred years.
You gave that sexist remark again, ladies.
Ladies and Gerald.
And future Geralds. We want to encourage other men that might have a creative talent, and
feminine sport.
it is Title 11 or whatever it is there that opened up college sports to women. So it is something that men can do, particularly retired men who have some time in their hands and are wondering what to do. Now, instead of just giving your phone numbers, people aren't going to necessarily write down phone numbers. Give us your name, and so they can look up the phone number.
Okay.
And if people want to just get on this on their own without joining a guild, there's libraries and stuff they can go to, the internet or whatever.
Oh yes, there's lots of information on quilting on the internet. We also, at our quilt guild, if they don't want to join, we have classes, ongoing classes at Mom Pa Craft Shop on the Military Turnpike, which is where we meet. There's ongoing classes during the week and on weekends, and that's in the phone book, Mom Pa, M-A-W, and P-A-W Crafts in Altona on the Military Turnpike. And my name is Pam Damour, D-A-M-O-U-R, and I'm in the phone book on Point of Fair Road. And if they have any questions, I teach quilting, and if they want a class, I can probably help them find a class that suits their needs. And otherwise, just get your needle and thread and get started, because until you start, you don't realize how much you're going to love it. It is addictive. Do you agree? Yes. It is addictive. And anyone who gets sucked into our web agrees that once you're a quilter, you will always be a quilter.
You're kind of like a cult, huh?
Yeah.
More serious note here, Leanne. I don't know you as Leanne Supernaw, but that is your name now, so I assume you're related to Donna Corrier Supernaw?
Yeah, somewhere along the line, kind of distant cousins, but not Supernaws through my maiden name.
Oh, through the Trombley side. Okay. There's an article in the paper. Suzanne Moore did a story in the paper, and she's had her bone marrow transplant, and she's on the road to recovery. I know a distant relative of mine, Kevin Castine, had a similar operation a while back, and it's a long road, but a successful road, it looks like.
Yep, hopefully.
Now, can people donate through the Log Cabin Quilters if they want to contribute to the fund and they weren't able to attend here today? Is there an address?
They can donate, and we will put it right in her leukemia fund. Yes, absolutely.
Is there an address they can send it to?
They can send it to 4954 Military Turnpike, Altona, New York, 12910, and just address it to Log Cabin Quilters.
Okay. And my last question is, why 2 years? Why not next year? Why aren't we having a show next year?
Well, the Plattsburgh Guild, the Champlain Valley Quilt Guild, does a show every other year, and they're a much larger guild than we are, so we're not trying to bite off more than we can chew. This was an incredible amount of work to pull together in a few months, and if we had to do this every year, it would be overwhelming. Plus, we all have basically a lifetime of quilts here. That's why we have such a big show. In 2 years, we can't show any of these quilts. I mean, we have to show all new stuff. So we need a couple years to finish our projects at home that we haven't finished, so that we have more things to show. And for a group our size, it's a more realistic proposition. And this way, next year, Plattsburgh will have their show, and so we can alternate years with them. And hopefully, we can share the same crowd, and they'll come to our show one year and go to Plattsburgh the next year.
Okay, thank you very much. We've been at the Log Cabin Quilters Show at St. Edmunds, and we would thank Pam Damour and Leanne Supernaut for taking us through here. It was a quick tour. There's a lot of these quilts we did not see, so next time you see there's a quilting show, don't wait to watch it on Hometown Cable. Get out there and take a look for yourself, and if you're interested, Pam told you all about how to get involved. Okay, here's a group shot here. Leanne's getting out of the shot here. Her camera's being used for the group photo, so. These are your Log Cabin Quilters. Not to be confused with a group of with a similar name. These are Log Cabin Quilters in the Altona area.
Maybe the flash isn't ready? It might
This
not.
is
The flash isn't ready, it won't flash on.
This is the starting lineup, I guess, for the Quilters. They quilt and play softball. I ain't going to stop till every camera's out of film. We're out of here.
For the Son and the Holy Spirit.